Alright, welcome back to We Play Games. I'm Walker, and here we are in our Vicky 3 Academy series, about to do a really interesting video on how to expand without really spiking your infamy. So we've done a lot of like how to map paint while just like declaring war on people, marching your troops in, occupying their capital, wham bam, done. And that's quite effective in Victoria 3, at least in 1.1.2. But it's not the only way to grow. One of the most important things when it comes to the way your economy is going to operate is, of course, the market. And so in this case, we have grown our market pretty considerably by 1839, although we are far from done. But we have grown by adding all of the Benelux, Sweden, Brazil. All of these guys have been added to our customs union, and most of them have been added to our customs union via this right here. This is bankrolling. So bankrolling is a special Diplo action that you get access to as long as you have the central banking technology. The central banking technology will also allow you to take on debt. But whereas take on debt requires the permission of the country in question, you can always bankroll people. And bankrolling, typically speaking, is going to cost less influence, see here 100 on Denmark, than it would cost to improve relations. It's 150 to improve relations here with Denmark. And that's because part of the cost here is being eaten by your budget. See, we're doing minus 44k in Diplopac, and that's because we're just pushing tons and tons of British money out into the world. But in turn, by doing this bankrolling, we are going to have a small chance of getting a new obligation. And by bankrolling a whole bunch of people, we're going to get obligations on someone. And whenever we get those obligations, we use them for something. You want to absolve the first couple of obligations that you get just to get your relations all the way up. Friendly is ideal, but you don't have to have friendly in order to get the final position here. You want to check to see if you can use an obligation to force them into a customs union. In this case, we've used obligations to force Belgium into ours, but now we can even use an obligation to force them into becoming a protectorate. And this is going to be really effective for us because it's going to give us 6.5 infamy instead of the 39 infamy it would take to puppet them. And then people say, but a protectorate is not really the same thing as a puppet. And you know, you would be right. However, that's not going to be the end of the line here for us. So now we've successfully reduced Belgium down to being a protectorate rather than a member of our customs union. But now whenever we start a make puppet Diplo play against Belgium, you see here 3.9 infamy. And that's because you only get 10% of the infamy you would get whenever you are starting a make puppet Diplo play against someone who is already your protectorate. And so what that means is not only would we be able to turn Belgium into a puppet for an incredibly small amount of infamy, and therefore avoid having like massive world wars, but at 10% of the infamy, you can make all of Japan into a puppet for 11 infamy basically. And the way that this is powerful, of course, is that you can combine it with just like naturally map painting, and there is a value to doing that too. Brazil accepts the demand to become our protectorate. It does create a 5-year truce with Brazil, but over the course of that 5 years, guess what? We are going to stop bankrolling them, and we're going to turn around and we're going to start damaging relations. And the reason behind this, of course, is that we want to make sure that at the end of those 5 years that we can start a make puppet Diplo play against them, because now it's only 6.4 infamy in order to make Brazil into a puppet. And of course, we are strong enough where making Brazil into a puppet is kind of going to be an easy win for us. And we've done so while keeping our infamy insanely low. We're only at 5.8, which means that we can continue to do lots of trade in the world. And of course, because we're doing all of this trade and moving of goods back and forth, we do need a really big naval presence. And that's sort of what this whole strategy kind of focuses you towards, is you do need lots of ports, you do need lots of shipyards. You're going to develop an economy that's largely based off of moving goods around. But there are a couple of big weaknesses here. First, any nation that you're trying to use an obligation to turn them into a protectorate, they can say no. It's not an automatic yes. It's just a plus 50 on this acceptance score. But any country that's going to be pursuing a strategy of defend the borders is going to naturally resist any attempt to use the obligations against them. But also the size of their army power projection, you can see there that also adds to the acceptance score. And so if you're going to be pursuing a strategy here of trying to use your obligations all of the way, then you're probably going to have to build a relatively large army anyways. It doesn't mean that you need to be mobilizing your army all of the time. That's one of the really big advantages to expanding this way, is that you do not have to have your army on the field 100% of the time. And that means that you can just focus on building up a pretty large barracks and seeing if you can bully people that way. But be aware that this strategy also does not work against unrecognized major powers, and so there are some size limits in terms of where this strategy is most useful. It's most useful on the nations that are going to be unrecognized regional powers, minor powers, major powers, but you do want to be targeting up, because you can save a ton of infamy, even if you're not going insane and just bankrolling everybody. If you're just bankrolling like very specific countries that you need very specific control over, that can be very powerful too. And of course, here we are turning the Netherlands into a protectorate, same way. You just build up your army, build up your military in a way that will cause the Netherlands to respect your power. Then for brevity's sake, I'm not going to wait for these guys to come all the way down. This final phase where you're trying to reduce states from being protectorates into being puppets, it'll occur naturally over time. You just have to wait for your relations to come back down. But if you want to speed it up, of course you can put things on damage relations, and that'll help bring people back down to below 20, at which point you can use the make puppet diplo play. But here you can see we can turn Brazil into a puppet for 5.9 infamy. 5.9 infamy. And of course, by growing this way and keeping our infamy very, very low, we do prevent ourselves from being stuck in cut down to size wars, which means we can focus a lot on growing our economy. And so this is a pretty easy way to just leverage your cash if you're not interested in just building up a giant construction sector and going to town from there, but instead in sending it out into the world. My recommendation is to specifically target large countries that do not have the defend the borders, because that's going to dramatically increase your chance of getting a protectorate. But yeah, that's how to expand without accruing infamy, or how to expand peacefully in Victoria 3. I think it is very strong, actually. I think generally speaking, if you want to leverage it the most, I think that you should combine it with some actual power projection. Don't be afraid to mobilize your troops to demand treaty ports and war reparations. We could probably go back to war with Great Qing and demand some more stuff, especially war reparations, because of course this sort of diplomacy, it's very expensive, and while minus 32k in diplopacts is not like the end of the world for a great power like the UK, you do want to offset it somehow, and beating up the Great Bank of Great Qing by going to Formosa is probably on the table. That's Walker. Take care.